Hello, everyone, and welcome to this community webinar. We're so excited that you could be here today to hear about the lit review process and products from our summer interns. I'm excited to be joined by some amazing folks, colleagues online with us today who are going to tell us about what they did this summer and all about it. I won't do any spoilers. So right now we're doing the welcome. We're going to go into the lit review presentations shortly after that, and then open it up for discussion. So feel free to use the chat along the way and type your questions and comments into the chat. And then after the presentations, we will have a chance to kind of open the floor for you all and discuss. So here at Photovoice Worldwide, we're all about training, consulting, products, and community. And this webinar right now and right here is our community product. We really believe in bringing people together, bringing diverse groups together to learn about photo voice and arts-based methods and to talk and discuss. In many cases, you may be the only person who knows about this or in your organization or at your university who's using this process or interested in this. And so really want to create a community of folks who can learn and join together and share ideas. You all may be coming with various levels of background and knowledge. So we encourage you to contribute to that definitely during the discussion and throughout the day in the chat as well. So thank you for being here. Quick background on Photovoice. It's a process that asks people to represent their lives, their point of view, and their experiences. So it's been used with a number of groups and individuals all around the world. And really it's about giving individuals a camera and the opportunity to take photographs and write captions, discuss them, and present and share about their experiences and about the knowledge that they have. This puts power into the hands of the participants. And so participants become co-researchers who are generating the data and the themes alongside researchers. So a little bit of background about Photovoice, and you will hear a little bit more today. So why are we here today? We're here to share together in this diverse group in a unique setting where we can come together from all across the world and grow the knowledge of Photovoice and really build a community around this. And so we're excited to be here today to hear from our lit review interns at Photovoice Worldwide this summer. We had fabulous interns who went through the process and worked as a group to learn about and construct a lit review on a number of different topics. And so without further ado, I will pass it over to the group to share about the work that they did and what they learned this summer. Thank you all for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, for this lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Maili Yunus. I'm going to be the first presenter here to tell you about what we did over the summer. So a little bit of background. So I was the lead intern in this lit review summer internship. My role was to provide sort of a structure and a detailed process where the individual projects that were done by my fellow interns could be done in an easy and a smooth way. A little bit of background about who I am. Again, I'm Maili Yunus. I'm a lecturer at the University of Northern Colorado in both the educational psychology and research methods departments. I'm also a Photovoice researcher and educator. Photovoice is really central to my work in both in the classroom and in the research areas that I work in. And my areas of expertise are into transformative learning, visual qualitative research methods, and also culturally responsive teaching. So during the summer, I was actually still in graduate school. I was in the final phase of wrapping up my dissertation. And the internship was really a great opportunity where I can really take my academic skills and put them into practice in a way that would serve the community. So when I started contacting Photovoice Worldwide, and I worked closely with Dr. Lorenz, we were talking about how the purpose of this internship is to like really have different projects done, lit reviews done, that would inform, as Stephanie was saying, the training programs that they provide, the consulting work that they are offering to multiple organizations or individuals. And so we needed to know what's like really out there in the literature, in the recent literature specifically, in these like different areas and different topics that my colleagues are going to be presenting about today. And so that's why we decided on doing scope and reviews as a specific type of like literature reviews, in order to have like an overview of like that landscape in each and specific topic that we were covering for that internship. The timeline that we worked with was 10 weeks, and we provided kind of like a detailed process of like what each week will entail and how we will make use of the time. For us to work together and organize the process and actually like get like, to work together as a group, we had like weekly synchronous meetings where we met like every week via Zoom. We also had asynchronous weekly tasks that we would be working on, but it's still like communicating through Slack as a communication channel, and also providing documents and feedback to each other through the Google folder that we created. We had, again, like a teamwork-based environment that we were just like working together, supporting each other as a community of learners. The whole process was very interactive, very iterative, and I'll give you an example of like how we worked this process in an interactive way through the guiding exercises and activities that I developed for the team to be able to go through the whole lit review process easily. So again, like there are different types of like how you could conduct literature reviews, and we decided on the scoping review because we wanted to know what are like, again, the landscape is providing. We wanted to map also like what are the key concepts in each area that we were conducting literature reviews on. And for example, like I know that my colleague Philip like did his literature review on Photovoice being done online, and that's like still an area that's not like really well researched in the literature. We used a framework that has been done in multiple studies by our Arksy and O'Malley. And what I really like about this model, that it has like detailed steps that could guide the process easily. So the way I tend to think about like what's the easiest way to conduct a lit review, that you have to have an objective, you're right? Like you have to have like an idea, like a guiding question that will guide you through the whole process. Once you have like this guiding question, it helps you actually like narrow down and look at like what are the studies that I would be looking for in that like world of literature. Because if you get there without having like a guiding question to anchor you, you get lost in the variety of articles being published out there. And so like that guiding question would help us also like decide what studies that we need to select. After having a selection and a number of studies that we will be working with, we started working at charting the data and how to like actually look at the breakdown of each article to have an overview of what's out there. And the final phase would be summarizing and analyzing this data in a way that we could report it and find like what are the key concepts, what has been done, and what's still lacking in the literature. So for example, when we started working with the whole idea of guiding question, like sometimes it's easy to say, write a research question or write like a guiding question. But when it comes to like having the hands-on part, it's difficult to think about like how could I form that research question. And so we started thinking about like what is it that we want to really look for. We have to have decisions in relation to what are the population or populations that we're looking for. Are we looking for like a lit review to be done around a certain age group, for example, because we had like a concept that is related to youth. So in that case, like we need to look at this particular age group. Is it specific to gender or like at a certain educational level or like a certain sexual orientation if you are looking to do like research related to like LGBTQ community, for example, and so on and so forth. We also wanted to define like what are the interventions or like the Photovoice interventions that were done in this specific area. Is there like a particular intervention that we want to focus on rather than like others? For example, like did we want to like include group only interviews or like individual meetings as well? Comparators, that has to do with like, did we consider or like we wanted to consider articles that did like Photovoice and also looked at like alternative interventions to Photovoice and did like some sort of comparison in the same article or in the same study, yes or no? What are the outcomes that we were hoping to accomplish out of like this lit review? Are we measuring the efficacy? Are we looking at like how the outcome of like Photovoice improved the community policies and decision making, or what kind of like impact was happening out there? We also needed to consider what context where these studies were done in. Like, are we looking at, for example, like studies that were done in a specific country or a specific region or a specific setting, like in mental health, topic, for example, did we look at like only studies that were done in hospital or like, medical facilities, or we were open to have this like, be explored in multiple settings? We wanted also to look at the study design. Are we including only qualitative studies or studies that also employed like mixed methods? To go like based on like actually going through these like points and deciding what kind of like question that we are forming for each of these projects, my fellow interns like really needed to go a little bit deeper to decide like what are the studies that they will be like looking for and where to look for them specifically. So we needed to decide on where are we going to do the searches? Are we going to use like only databases that are available online? Are we including hard copies? So where people have to like go to the libraries and like really search in these like books and other like documentations that are available on the shelf? What kind of language that we are actually like looking for? Are we looking for studies that were published only in English, or are we looking for studies that were published in English plus other languages, for example? What kind of literature that we're looking at? Are we looking at like only peer-reviewed published articles online? Or are we looking in these plus also gray literature, kind of like, reports published from certain organizations or white papers and so on and so forth? What are the search terms that we are going to be using to look for these specific articles or resources that we are trying to like hunt down? What also, time frames? So are we looking in the literature that has been done in the past, like 10 years, 5 years, 20, 15? We needed to have like a time frame and a time limit where we can like look at these specific articles that we are trying to like include in our literature review. Lastly, we needed to have like a very specific detailed like inclusion and exclusion criteria that even within this like bounded search that would help us like even refine and screen more of like what to include and what not to include. So for example, are we including only empirical papers, or did we need to include also like papers that were like either like opinion papers or like systematic reviews, or both? So that was just kind of like an example of like what to include and what not to include. After we have done like all these activities and developed like what the search is going to be, my colleagues started like actually going on and like hunting articles down. Each project was targeting between 25 to 30 articles, and the maximum that we were looking for was 40. So the range was between like 25 to like 40 articles that could be found. In order to go through like that phase of like charting the data, basically, if you think about it, it's a matter of like really looking closely at each article and what it has to offer, so we can have a deeper understanding of what are the studies that we have collected so far through these articles are providing us with. So we created like a spreadsheet where we can include like these like specific pieces of information in. That would help us like later to actually do like the summarizing and reporting. So we included a column that had like the authorship, year of publication, and then a column for like what was the study purpose or focus, what kind of participants were included in this study, the location and setting, what was the study design and methodology that was being used, like how the Photovoice was being implemented in details, the results and the outcome of that study, and also the Photovoice impact in particular, and how like the Photovoice product was being disseminated, and notes that each intern would have on these like specific articles. These were like the main headings that we had, but each intern had the right to like actually modify those according to their project and what they see fit. After completing the charting of the data of all these like articles that we collected, we went to the last phase, which is like basically summarizing. And the way I tend to think about summarizing and reporting the data when it comes to like literature review, it's very similar. If you're familiar with the whole process of like qualitative data coding, it's creating themes. What are the main themes that you have found in that process of like reading through all these articles that could actually be presented in terms of like being main ideas or themes that are found in the literature that we have been like looking at. And so we had to go through like another and like last activity pretty much, that was the synthesis matrix, where my fellow interns like decided what are like the, again, like the main ideas or like key themes that they have found in their respective topics, and decided what were the articles that actually pertain to each of these themes. The final process was to have like the internship outcome that was towards the very end, and these steps that we have been like going through and these activities that we have been completed were turned into final products. So for example, the spreadsheet was the main source where we had like an annotated bibliography to have like a list of the articles that were included. The matrix, the synthesis matrix, is turned into a PowerPoint presentation plus like the whole process, and this will be part of the presentations that you will be seeing with my fellow interns, and also presenting and sharing the results with the community through the community webinar that we're conducting right now. And hopefully they will take also their products to conference presentations, and the long-term goal is to have publications coming out of this. This was the work that we have done in the summer. Future steps for me is to teach graduate level courses, and also to develop and deliver Photovoice courses through Photovoice Worldwide in the area of like data analysis. I'm working closely with Dr. Lorenz right now to develop that course and hopefully offer it in the spring, early summer. Another course that we are looking at is to like start doing like literature review cohort-based courses where we can help researchers in the area of Photovoice to like actually conduct like literature reviews with the same process that we have worked with in the summer, and also courses related to diversity and inclusion and how Photovoice could be like a very helpful tool to learn and develop skills in this area. One final project that I'm having on the table right now is to start like actually writing a book about Photovoice in higher education classrooms, because that's where my focus is at in research right now. If you have any questions for me, or like would love to stay in touch, I would be happy to hear from you. On the screen right now is like my contact information, both emails and also my Twitter handle if you would like to follow me on Twitter. If you have any questions for me, please list them in the chat. I'll hand the presentation now to my colleague, Kristin, who will start presenting on the first project that we have conducted. Thank you.
Okay, so let me. Not sure why I can't get it to present now. Stephanie? Any ideas. We got it to work when I started.
Kristin, would you like me just to present, and then you can just tell me when to advance the slides if you want to do that?
Kristin, I'm happy to play the slides for you if you want.
Or you can move the sidebar over a little bit.
Oh, okay. I'll try that.
And that'll make them a
I don't
little
know
bit.
why it's not working. Let me just try to refresh it,
Okay.
if that helps. Okay, so I think I can refreshing it works. So let me just get back to my screen share. Sorry, everybody. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So I'm Kristin Powell. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. I'm a mother of 5 beautiful children. This is a picture of my family, my husband Jared, and my kids, who my oldest is a senior in high school and our youngest is a kindergartner. So we are a very busy family. I've been a licensed cosmetologist since 2003. The hairpist is a gift from one of my clients, kind of a running joke that hairstylists are like people's therapists, which is funny since I went back to school in 2019 to become some type of counselor. I'm hoping to apply to counseling PhD programs right now. So I'm currently finishing a bachelor's in psychology at the University of Colorado. So that's where I'm at now. And I was drawn to Photovoice through Dr. Eunice from working with her on her Photovoice project for her dissertation. And so that's how I got involved with Photovoice. So my guiding question was, how has Photovoice been used in mental health research and in interventions? So these are some of the databases that I searched. And that was, as Dr. Eunice talked about, this is the question that guided all of my research. So these are some of the search terms that I used. I specifically was looking for articles. I used only English articles that were all found online. And they use Photovoice specifically in it, and as opposed to other photo-elicitation methods. And I use search terms such as mental health, mental illness, interventions, counseling, and therapy, which resulted in a lot of studies, 659, and I ended up using 31 of those in my literature review. So here's an example of the table that we use to chart the data. And these are some of the headings. I added a few more headings than we had originally had on there because they were pertinent to my literature review. For instance, the setting was interesting because I included lots of settings, like because it was mental health, we had some inpatient settings, there were outpatient, people who were in outpatient treatment, there were things within the community, there were university settings, but they all had the underlying theme of mental health or mental illness. And then this is an example of just a chunk of my synthesis matrix where we collected all of our ideas. And so my main ideas, that the themes that developed from the literature review were stigma, the lived experience, and how people, the sub kind of ideas under that were recovery and wellness, and then factors that contributed to suicide, and study settings, as I said, inpatient, outpatient, communities, university. And then one of the other unique.
Sorry, but your voice is getting lost all the time. We haven't been able, at least me, to hear relevant parts.
Articles that I found, around 9% were the main focus of the study was on suicide, 19% on stigma, around 38% in lived experience, and then 32% in recovery and wellness. And then here's a breakdown of the study setting, 19% at a university, 9% at inpatient, 35 outpatient, and 35 of the studies were done with just within the community. And so this was a breakdown of some of the key findings just within stigma. Stigma, 19% of the articles, the focus was on stigma, but it was mentioned in the majority of the article. Part of people's lives when they have mental illness or mental health issues. And some interesting things that came out of it was there was actually an intervention and not just a participatory research method self-stigma. And then there was other articles that just demonstrated the lived experience of stigma, kind of seeing it through the lens of the person who's dealing with it. And then there were also 2 articles that also had interventions that were an effort to reduce mental health stigma. One of them was among primary care providers, and the other was among university students. Here's some key findings from recovery and wellness. A lot of the research really underscored the importance of community-based participatory research is needed in psychology and mental health, and that Photovoice proved to be a flexible and creative method, and it was effective in demonstrating that lived experience of people and giving us a glimpse into their lives and the things that they deal with. And then another interesting intervention was the recovery narrative Photovoice, which facilitated recovery-related outcomes and, for instance, empowerment or positive identity, community integration, getting people into work environments, things like that. And then the last one was probably the most interesting to me. There were some really unique kind of dissemination techniques that were used. So this column just has all links to actually all of the online galleries that people used, which is really kind of fun to see all of the pictures and narratives. And then there was 2 that were traveling exhibits that they would take up and move around. Couple did presentation. And then this anti-stigma intervention was where they presented like a live to somebody. And then a live performance, which is where they had the participants have their photos and their stories, and it was presented live to a group of primary care providers, medical providers. And then this participatory photo mapping was on a university campus. They had QR codes that the university students could scan, and then it would bring up the photo and the narrative with it. And then this last one was the participants made a personalized scrapbook. So my overall conclusions from my Photovoice literature review on mental health was that it was used in a wide variety of ways in lots of settings, group and individual. And there were maybe a need for more consistent pre and post-test kind of measures in the intervention type of things. And there were not many male participants. It was predominantly female. And in all of the research I read, none of them were transgender or non-binary participants. So that's kind of wraps up my mine. So the next steps for me are I plan on graduating in the spring, and I'm also working continuing a literature review with Dr. Lorenz and Dr. Eunice on the data analysis. And I'm applying to counseling psychology PhD programs right now. So if you have any questions for me, just put them in the chat and I'll stick my email in there as well. Love to keep in touch. And then I'll hand it off to my colleague, Leanne.
Can everyone see my screen? Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, thank you. Hi guys. My name is Leanne Tarigny, and I'm gonna tell you guys a little bit about myself first, and then I'll explain the process and the topic I researched this summer. So I'm currently based out of North Carolina, and I graduated from Gardner-Webb University in May of 2020 with my bachelor's in psychology and a double minor in American Sign Language and Communications. I'm currently working 3 jobs right now. I'm continuing my work with Photovoice Worldwide, and I work at an art center day program called UMAR, as well as coordinating a photography project, the 1,000 Words Photography Project with a nonprofit called Connectability. So in the picture on the left, the blue book that I'm holding, this was my honors thesis. I did a research in my undergrad, and I looked at how therapeutic photography helps individuals with depression and anxiety. And the book on the left was from the 1,000 Words Project from last year. So that's just a little bit about myself. Let's see. Okay, so coming into the internship, I had previously and current work with children and adults with disabilities. So looking at special education programs seemed like a pretty good fit for my interest. So through some discussion with my team, I came to the guiding question of how has Photovoice been used within schools to further educate or promote advocacy and inclusivity for students with disabilities. So that was my main question that guided my research. So once I had my research question, I started my search for articles. Some of the main databases I looked at included Google Scholar, PsycInfo, Sage Journals, Wiley Online, and ProQuest. Some of the search terms I used included Photovoice, special education, school, intellectual disabilities, and learning disabilities. And so after my initial search, I ended up with 32 articles. And then once I went through some exclusion criteria, which I'll explain in just a moment, I ended up with 17 articles total. So after talking with my team, I realized the word disability covered a really broad topic. So to narrow it down, I picked specific disabilities that I would be looking at. Some of these included autism, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and for other health impairments, I included ADD and ADHD, since those were common within schools. For my age range, I kept it open to K through 12, along with college programs. I did this because it's not a topic that's been widely studied. So there was not a huge amount of articles on this topic. And for the same reason, I kept my time frame pretty open to about 21 years from 2000 to the present. And I also decided to keep it open to quantitative and qualitative data. Photovoice in itself is obviously qualitative data, but some of them included mixed methods. So I included all of those. So this is an image, an example of what one article charted looked like for me. So I included the citation, the research design, and I chose to focus on like the change in Photovoice, and I highlighted this because of the population I was working with. Many of the projects were changed to adapt to the learning development of the participants. I also looked at the purpose of the study, the location and setting, any important demographics of the participants, and the result and conclusion from the study, and then any extra things I thought were worth noting. So after looking through and charting the data from the 17 articles, I created 2 big main ideas, and the second idea was split into 2 parts. So the first main idea looked at Photovoice as a pedagogy or as a classroom learning tool. And then the second main idea was revolved around Photovoice using as a research tool. The first part looked at Photovoice and using it to understand the physical and or mental barriers that students experience with disabilities. And then the second part looked at Photovoice as a research tool to create more awareness and to create a more inclusive school and community. So once I created these main ideas, I created this chart, the synthesis chart that looked at the articles. And so this is an example of what one of the ideas looked like. the main ideas in the left column, and then I explained in the following columns about each of the articles and how it applies to that idea. So for the first main idea, which was Photovoice as a pedagogy, there were 3 main articles that looked at this, and they used the photo voice within the classroom. And some examples of that, they used, the students used photo voice to explore topics such as multiculturalism and inclusivity. And they did this through homework assignments, group projects, and presentations within the class. The second main idea was photo voice with research, specifically to understand physical and mental barriers that students experience. And so 5 of these articles focused on photo voice to understand the strengths and barriers of college programs for students and with disabilities. And then another 3 look specifically at K through 12 and those program strengths and barriers. For the second part of this idea was to create more awareness and inclusivity in school and communities. So 4 of the articles actually took the perspective of the teachers and administrators, comparing and contrasting classrooms, programs, and schools as a whole to look at what has been done and what could be done to improve programs. And then another 6 articles took on the perspective of students. And this was to understand their lived experiences and to share their lived experiences with their peers and their teachers and family. So overall, I found there was a real lack of uses photo voice as pedagogy, at least when it comes to special education programs. And I really only found a few articles that touched on this topic. So I think moving forward, a further use of photo voice with pedagogy should be explored. And then based on my research and readings, I believe students should really be more involved in the formation of these programs. They can provide a lot of insight into opportunities that could benefit them. And this is where I think research being conducted with specific disabilities would be really interesting. And there is an importance in administrators working together and sharing their experiences. The 4 articles I read that involved administrators were great, but further research would be beneficial for future formation and expansion on programs. And then photo voice was used to create inclusion. The students and their peers were able to learn from each other. But I did find a good lack of articles about K through 12 with this. A lot of it was based in college programs. So that would be another area of further research. So moving forward, I'll be starting my master's in psychology at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, with the hope of one day getting my PhD to further research, hopefully in this area. Until then, I'll be continuing my work with Connectability, UMAR, and Photovoice Worldwide. If you have any questions for me, I would be happy to talk with you. This is my email. I'll put it in the chat if anyone would like to connect. And now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Philip as he shares about his experience. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Leanne. As Leanne said, my name is Philip Arneil. I'm a photographer and a PhD researcher at Ulster University, which is in Belfast. I'm a long-term resident of Tokyo in Japan. I'm now based back, partly by choice, partly by circumstances, in Northern Ireland, which is originally where I'm from. And I began my PhD part-time in 2020. And I'm looking at Protestant identity in Ireland through the architecture of what are known as Orange Halls, which are meeting and worship halls for the Orange Order fraternity. And I'm doing it through photography. I got involved with Photovoice because I suppose for me, particularly thinking in terms of the PhD, I wanted to demystify the whole literature review process, which I think is something that I sort of had a slight dread about when I started the PhD in particular. And it's been really, really helpful in that in that degree, but also in many other ways. I've always been fascinated with Photovoice as an approach, particularly because I'm a photographer. And so this was a perfect opportunity to kind of marry all three of these things together through the internship. And so what I looked at was this idea initially, what I was describing, I suppose, as remote photo voice. And I learned very quickly, obviously, from starting this process, that the term remote is a little bit of a red herring, because obviously it could literally be a TV remote. It could also be remote populations, and it could take in studies conducted further back than the beginnings of the internet. So it wasn't the greatest way to start getting into the literature by using that terminology. So I switched towards the idea of online and also virtual delivery of photo voice. And actually I'd done a very small project during lockdown with some young adults, with some vulnerable young adults with additional learning needs. And again, this had kind of sparked my interest. This was done completely remotely through Zoom and Google apps for education. Obviously with COVID, it's particularly relevant to the idea of delivering online. We were all forced in to varying degrees during the lockdowns to working at home, socializing at home, and getting all our entertainment perhaps through the online world as well. And so again, it was a perfect storm of these things that allowed me to kind of start looking at this idea of delivering photo voice online. So my guiding question was fairly simple. How has it been applied remotely using online tools, just to specify, and also then what are the facilitators and barriers? I'm not going to go through all those bullet points for you, but if you want to look back through them, you certainly can in the recording, but you'll see there 11 databases, 27 papers. And I was very specific about the criteria that it was just photo voice, not photo elicitation. And it had to have a very clear element of photo voice in the project for it to be included.
Philip, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm still seeing just your first slide.
Oh, how strange.
I don't know if anyone else has yeah.
So is that?
No, still just seeing the first one.
That's weird. Let me just unshare and reshare, because let me just try that again. How strange.
They look so interesting. I don't want to miss them.
You
Oh, they
don't have the
are.
presentation modus, you have the working modus.
Yeah, I did put it in the presentation, but it doesn't seem to have fired up. So let me just try that again. How about that? Does that say remote photo voice or?
Yes, now yes.
Good now.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries, and thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, so you should be able to see the guiding question slide. If you can't, just let me know or pop it into the chat. But yeah, so how is photo voice being applied remotely using online tools? What are the facilitators and barriers? As I said, there are 11 databases, 27 papers. My criteria was that it was only photo voice, not photo elicitation. And I suppose for these kind of online delivery, I was looking at video conferencing, messaging, social media platforms, such as Zoom, but not things like email, phone, or anything based using letters and things like that. So that kind of helped, I suppose, dictate the time period, which, as you can see there, was 2005. 2021. I think Skype came out originally in 2003. I'm sure it was a lot less basic than it is now. And obviously Zoom has had this massive increase in popularity, particularly in the last 18 months, 2 years. And so that was something to focus on as well in terms of finding those studies. Hopefully that's progressing okay. Please do let me know if it's not. Leanne and Kristin have covered this already, but obviously then we charted the data in terms of what we would include and what we would exclude. And I used a very similar approach. You can see there, obviously it was the purpose of the study, and then I made some notes and comments and also what the results of the study were. But obviously I wasn't evaluating the effectiveness of the study in itself. I was looking at the elements of it which were delivered online or using online tools. I did a very similar synthesis matrix, which is quite hard to say. And you can see down there on the right-hand side, these were the way that I organized them. Obviously, with a lot of the studies, there is some overlap. but I focused on those main 6 bullet points. And I also looked at a couple of non-journals. They focused on Photovoice being conducted completely online, or actually how to do it online. And the reason they were non-journals is that they're very, very recent studies, and so they're currently being written up to be submitted to journals as well. So the key findings, or the things that I came across, was amazingly that this online delivery of Photovoice is still surprisingly uncommon, and it's actually quite, I think, an emergent approach. Some studies do, of course, use online elements and have done in the past, but quite often this is from necessity rather than a conscious choice. And I found that it's rarely an integral part of that approach. It's also not often evaluated in the study itself. It's just mentioned incidentally. And I also discovered that delivery of Photovoice online can be both empowering and limiting. And I'm sure that's something that resonates with all of us, having lived and worked online for such a long time over the last 2 years. Just to sort of flesh out those key findings a little bit, in terms of Photovoice online, it's still quite uncommon, as I said, and only 7 of the 20 studies that I included in the scoping review actually took this approach. Obviously, it probably seems an obvious thing to say, but it is a fundamental requirement if you're going to deliver any scale of a study online, that there's a minimum level of infrastructure. And so often, of course, this can dictate the efficacy of the study. Things like availability of smartphones, if you're using those for cameras, bandwidth for virtual meetings, even things like if you're using digital camera storage, what ways to store photos and so on and so forth. And then in some cases, even access to social media as well. Even when online elements are incorporated, such as Facebook pages or groups and things like that, they're not always, as I said, evaluated for efficacy. They're just mentioned as a way that the study was conducted, but there's no comment any further on how useful or effective they were. What also came out from a lot of the studies was this idea that there is really a need for an information session and training in the specific use of tech. So not necessarily Photovoice methods and so on, but actual using the tools themselves. And obviously then within that, building up expectations by consensus as well of how they're used, when they're used, and what's the etiquette around that as well. Similarly, ethics around using images online and creating what was described in one study as a safe virtual space. You can see here, Tanhan and Strack have developed what they're calling explicitly this idea online Photovoice, and it's abbreviated as OPV, as a very considered and conscious approach. And this seems to be something that then is being picked up and adapted by some other academics as well. You can see there Tanhan is obviously involved in those studies too. And this is this idea that really the whole study is online, and also the use of online tools is being evaluated and analyzed as part of the overall findings. In terms of facilitators and limitations, which was the second part of my guiding question, well, obviously it's cheaper, particularly now with things like Zoom and other platforms. You can increase the access to participants. So perhaps previously, if you're doing Photovoice projects offline in a local area, it can be quite limited, but obviously by opening it up to the online space, you can get a lot more participants involved, and you can even conduct that across national and international borders. There's an argument as well in a couple of the studies that it can be potentially more motivating, particularly for young people. So if they're using something, not old-fashioned digital cameras where you're taking out the card and putting it in a computer, et cetera, perhaps using something like Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok even, and sharing those kind of images, there may be an element where it's easier to get more involvement and excitement from young people that are doing the studies. Online spaces can obviously enable anonymity for sensitive topics, which is a great thing as well, and it can protect participants. Mali mentioned earlier about LGBT, for example. There may be studies conducted in countries where it's illegal to be gay, for example. And so obviously there's anonymity there that can have a real impact on personal security, but it doesn't preclude people from being involved in the study. There are ways to mitigate internet access. So for example, audio files explaining the process, explaining what's required and so on, rather than that being something that has to be streamed and uses up a lot of data. And then obviously online exhibitions of the final work can be hosted quite cheaply and for much longer. And of course, then also shared with a wider audience. In terms of the limitations then, obviously I've mentioned access to devices and sufficient infrastructure. And I think if that's really, personally speaking, if that's really a challenge, then perhaps online photo voice and delivering it through online tools is not necessarily the best way to go. Asynchronous participation can sometimes potentially reduce responses and engagement and interactions with images. So they're going up there. Perhaps there's different time zones. People are going on in the morning or the day after or the day before, and you're not necessarily getting that discussion that you might expect around the images themselves. I think someone might have their mic on there. If you just want to pop that off, that'd be great. Thanks. Also, rapport can be different. And I put there different to build effectively. I didn't want to put difficult because I've delivered in my day job hundreds of webinars over the last couple of years. And you can build a rapport, but it definitely is different. And there's perhaps a different approach involved. So it's not that you can't necessarily do it, but it's not maybe as easy to do it. And maybe you have to take a different approach. So that can, in some cases, of course, be a limitation. And then similarly, with the online world, sharing of those images beyond the immediate study environment can also result in potentially compromising situations, or even situations that are putting some participants in danger as well. So that's something that can certainly be a limitation for these studies too. So just to sum up then, before I open it up to questions from anyone about any of the things that you've heard in this evening's session, online delivery of photo voice is heavily underutilized, I would say, and certainly under-researched. And there's definitely huge scope to fully explore and develop that approach of online photo voice. So if you're looking for a niche, this could certainly be one of those. If you're looking to conduct larger scale studies, again, this is something that you might want to consider. I think personally, you know, if this shift to working remotely and being online remains to some degree, whatever the current situation, wherever you are, is, it may potentially be easier to facilitate future projects. I think people are definitely more open to the idea of doing things online. People have been to things like yoga and Pilates classes and all these things that perhaps we would never have considered before. And now people are doing those kind of things, and in some cases continuing to do so. And so, you know, that really opens up, I think, a lot of possibilities, as well, of course, as scope and capacity and size of studies. I would say also, you know, that we could potentially expect really an explosion of these kind of studies. It may be that there has been quite a few of them conducted during COVID and various periods of lockdown. So keep your eyes open in the coming months and couple of years for these kind of studies that have perhaps been conducted, are now being written up and submitted to journals. And we should be seeing those coming out over the next couple of years. So that's all from me. My name is Philip Arneil. As I said, if you're looking to find me, you can find me on my website, philiparneil.com. You can also find my most recent project, which is called TokyoJazzJoints.com, conducted over 5 years in Japan. And if you're looking for me on social media, you'll find me on all the usual platforms at Philip Arneil. And thanks for your attention and for your participation in the webinar this evening. So I'm just going to open it up to the floor. If you want to pop a question in the chat box, or you'd like to just pop your mic on and ask any questions to any of the participants, please go ahead. And thanks again for your attention. I think we may have stunned everyone into silence, or perhaps I just did, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat. And remember that contact details for Leanne and Kristin are in there as well. And I'll just throw my own website into the chat there if you're interested in getting in touch.
Maybe I can, oh, good. Here's some questions. No comments? Wonderful. So one question I would have would be, now that you've been through this whole process, you worked together on it, is there anything that you might have done differently or would do differently another time? Either working on your own or as part of a group doing a lit review like this? It's open. I'm opening that to anybody.
Well,
I think for me, oh, go ahead, Philip.
No, you go ahead, Kristin, go ahead.
For me, I'd mentioned this before in our Photovoice meetings, but having a little bit, I felt like a newcomer a little bit to Photovoice, so I didn't have that much experience. So taking the Talking with Pictures course with Photovoice Worldwide was really helpful because I felt like it laid a really good foundation. So I think that always helps having a little bit more background knowledge. So it helped me to know more about what I was looking for in the literature review.
I'm not sure I would do anything differently, particularly. It's probably worth saying, and I'm not being paid to say this, but it was a really positive and fantastic experience, I think, for all three of us, because I know certainly I approached it with some trepidation. I thought it was going to be actually a lot heavier and more difficult, but it was set up very effectively in terms of the steps that we had to go through. We had that support and we had that guidance from both Mali and Laura as well. And so I think that really enabled, certainly for me, and I think I'm probably speaking for Kristin Leanne as well, just to really to sort of complete it. I didn't quite complete it in the time frame that I'd hoped for, but certainly that was more to do with myself than the way that the internship was conducted. So I don't know what everyone's stages are at, but I would highly recommend, if anyone's interested in signing up for one of the Photovoice Worldwide internships, it was really a very rewarding process. So I'd just like to say thanks as well when we have the chance.
I think we have a question in the chat about like what other areas of Photovoice research that we would like to explore. As Kristin has pointed out, like, yes, currently we have 2 projects going on. One of them is like exploring what are the different approaches of data analysis that have been conducted in the current literature, and you know, how they are being done, what's available, what's lacking, again, that we could like really focus on as a future effort. But we also working on exploring how the Photovoice methodology has been like used with the youth population in particular as part of like after school activities to explore how it has been done in terms of like working with them in the after school, in terms of like empowerment and identity development and other, you know, areas. One area that I am particularly interested in, and that's like hopefully would be like part of the future work, is like to explore how it has been like really implemented in the area of diversity and inclusion, whether it's like in educational settings or like workplaces, but in general, like how has it been like used in different like settings where we could just like use it as a tool to enhance, again, diversity and inclusion.
Mala, I think you had a question.
I did. Well, a question and a comment. I just want to thank you all for modeling how this could look, because I think, Molly, I really am interested in this structure that you created and how you all worked together, but worked on different topics. And I actually think that's really worthy of a webinar that you could do, or something around like how we as academics maybe structure that in a lab setting. Like, I'm thinking this is a great a great lab exercise, right, for those of us who are working with students, but we're trying to like do it individually, and it's just too much. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you know, it's interesting that you're mentioning that, because I think this is where I was coming from, that when I was in grad school, like all the time we're asked to do lit reviews, right? but nobody's like really providing us with like tools and like breaking it down into steps. And you feel like this is the most overwhelming task. You talk to anybody in academia, what's the part that you hate of like writing a paper? Lit reviews, right? And it doesn't have to be like it does. I mean, it sucks, but it doesn't have to suck. Like you just make it like really more manageable, right? And this is how I started thinking about like what are the tools, like how to make it like really practical and manageable, so it doesn't become like really overwhelming and intimidating for people, you know. But thank you for that comment, because I came to that like setup from the perspective that if I'm teaching a research methods course, I really want to provide my students with tools, you know, that would help them rather than like hinder the process and like have them be overwhelmed with the feeling that I can't do it. It's an overwhelming task. And it's very easy for people to quit when it's an overwhelming task, right? So yeah, I think the idea of like having a workshop is great to like gear that towards academics. So that could be like actually like a thing that we could spread around, so people, you know, would love doing literature reviews more than hating them.
I want to thank you all for joining us today and thank my amazing colleagues. It has been so nice to have you with us and doing this literature review and just contributing to Photovoice Worldwide in so many ways. So thank you for working hard and, you know, continuing to share your knowledge with us and bringing this community together. Please continue the conversation and stay in touch with us as we continue to talk about photo voice topics and arts-based methods. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.